The summer heat pressed down on the dusty reservation road as 5-year-old Tommy Running Bear walked barefoot toward the old trading post. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The worn-out sneakers in his small hands were too big for his feet, hand-me-downs from his older cousin who had outgrown them years ago. Tommy's grandmother had sent him to trade their last valuable possession, a small turquoise bracelet that belonged to his late mother, for enough food to last them through the week. His grandmother was too sick to make the journey herself, and there was no one else to help them. The nearest neighbor lived 5 miles away, and the tribal council was overwhelmed with families in similar situations. As Tommy rounded the bend near Eagle Rock, a massive stone formation that had watched over his people for generations, he heard deep voices speaking in his native Lakota tongue. The voices carried pain and desperation that made his young heart skip a beat. He had never heard grown men sound so helpless before. Curiosity overtook his fear as he crept closer to investigate. Behind the large boulder, he discovered 2 enormous men sitting on the ground. Even seated, they towered above anything Tommy had ever seen. Their broad shoulders and muscled arms were covered in traditional tattoos that told stories of great battles and spiritual journeys. Feathers hung from their long black hair, and their weathered faces bore the marks of warriors who had seen many seasons. The first warrior, who appeared to be the elder of the 2, had a deep scar running from his left temple to his jawline. His name was Standing Bear, though Tommy didn't know this yet. The second warrior, slightly younger but equally imposing, was called Thunder Horse. Both men wore traditional leather clothing adorned with intricate beadwork that sparkled in the afternoon sun. What shocked Tommy most was not their size or their fearsome appearance, but the fact that both warriors were crying. Tears rolled down their painted cheeks as they spoke in hushed tones about their failure and shame. These were men who looked like they could move mountains with their bare hands, yet they sat defeated and broken. Standing Bear held his head in his massive hands and spoke of how he had let down his ancestors. Thunder Horse pounded his fist against the earth, creating small dust clouds with each impact. They had been entrusted with a sacred mission by their tribal elders, something so important that the very survival of their people depended on it. But they had failed, and now they didn't know where to turn. Tommy remained hidden, his small body pressed against the cool stone as he listened to their conversation. The warriors spoke of an ancient prophecy, a test that required pure innocence and an untainted heart. They had traveled for many days, following signs and dreams that had led them to this exact spot. According to the tribal medicine man, they were supposed to find someone here who could help them complete their sacred task. But all they had found was emptiness. No wise elder, no spiritual guide, no powerful medicine man. Just rocks and desert and the endless blue sky above. They had been searching for 3 days without food or water, refusing to give up on their mission even as their strength faded. Their pride as warriors prevented them from returning home empty-handed, but their hope was disappearing like morning mist. Thunder Horse pulled out a small leather pouch and emptied its contents onto the ground between them. Inside were ancient artifacts, a crystal arrowhead that seemed to glow with inner light, a small bone whistle carved with symbols that predated written history, and a piece of sacred red clay that their ancestors had used in ceremonies for countless generations. These items were the key to their mission, but without the right person to help them, they were useless. The prophecy was specific. Only someone with a pure heart, untouched by greed or hatred, could activate the ancient power within these objects, someone who would act not for personal gain, but out of genuine desire to help others. As Tommy listened, his stomach growled again, loud enough that he worried the warriors might hear him. He pressed his small hand against his belly, trying to quiet the sound. The turquoise bracelet in his other hand seemed heavier now, weighted with the responsibility of keeping his grandmother and himself alive for another week. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Tommy knew he needed to reach the trading post before it closed, but something kept him rooted to this spot. These powerful warriors, these giants among men, were in pain. They needed help just like he and his grandmother did. Standing Bear suddenly looked up, his keen eyes scanning the area around their resting place. His warrior instincts told him they were no longer alone. Thunderhorse also became alert, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. They had survived countless battles by trusting their senses, and right now those senses were telling them that someone was watching. Tommy's heart raced as he realized he had been discovered. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The warriors would find him in seconds, and then what would happen? Would they be angry at him for spying? Would they chase him away, or worse? But as Standing Bear's eyes finally found Tommy's hiding place, something unexpected happened. Instead of anger or suspicion, the warrior's face showed surprise, then wonder, then something that looked almost like recognition. He nudged Thunderhorse and pointed toward the small boy who was now trembling behind the boulder. Tommy stepped out from his hiding place, his bare feet shuffling in the red dirt. He looked up at the two massive warriors with wide, innocent eyes that held no fear, only curiosity and concern. In his small hands, he still clutched the turquoise bracelet and the oversized sneakers, everything he owned in the world besides the clothes on his back. The three of them stared at each other in silence as the desert wind whispered through the sagebrush around them. None of them knew it yet, but this moment would change all their lives forever. Standing Bear was the first to speak, his deep voice gentle despite his intimidating appearance. He switched to English, recognizing that the small boy might not understand all the traditional words they had been using. "Little brother," he said, softly, "how long have you been listening to our conversation?" Tommy's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to spy on you. I was just walking to the trading post and I heard crying. I wanted to make sure nobody was hurt." His honesty surprised both warriors. Most people, even adults, would have lied about eavesdropping or would have run away at the sight of them. Thunderhorse studied the boy's face carefully. Despite his obvious poverty, the torn clothes, the bare feet, the thinness that spoke of many missed meals, there was something special about this child. His eyes held a clarity and kindness that reminded Thunderhorse of the ancient stories his grandfather used to tell about spirit children who appeared when the people needed them most. "What is your name, young one?" Standing Bear asked, gesturing for Tommy to come closer. The boy approached without hesitation, showing a trust that most children his age wouldn't display toward strangers, especially ones as formidable as these warriors. "Tommy Running Bear," the boy replied, unconsciously straightening his shoulders with pride despite his circumstances. "My grandmother says our family has been running bears for 7 generations. We're Lakota, like you." The warriors exchanged meaningful glances. Running Bear was a name of significance in their tribe's history. It belonged to a family line known for their courage and spiritual sensitivity. Standing Bear's own great-grandfather had fought alongside a running bear warrior in the battles against the cavalry many decades ago. Thunderhorse leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the small boy. "Tommy Running Bear," he said, testing the name on his tongue. "The spirits have a way of bringing the right people together at the right time. Perhaps it is no accident that you found us here." Standing Bear reached into his medicine pouch and withdrew the sacred objects, laying them carefully on a piece of elk hide between them. "We are on a mission given to us by the tribal council," he explained. "Our reservation is dying, little brother. The water has been poisoned by the mining company upstream, and our crops are failing. The children are getting sick, and the elders are losing hope." Tommy's eyes widened as he absorbed this information. He had wondered why his grandmother seemed sicker lately, and why some of his friends at the tribal school had been absent. Now the pieces were starting to fit together in a terrible picture. Thunderhorse continued the story. 3 moons ago, our medicine man had a vision. He saw 2 warriors traveling to this sacred place where they would meet someone pure of heart, who could help activate the power of these ancient objects. The crystal arrowhead contains the power to purify water for miles around. The bone whistle can call upon the rain spirits to bring healing storms. The sacred clay can restore the earth's fertility. But, Standing Bear added with a heavy sigh, the prophecy was specific. These objects can only be awakened by someone who has never known greed, someone who would give their last possession to help others, someone whose heart is untainted by selfishness or hatred. Tommy looked down at the artifacts, then at his own meager possessions. The turquoise bracelet seemed to pulse with warmth in his small hand. "How do you activate them?" he asked, his young mind already working through the possibilities. "The ritual is ancient and complex," Thunderhorse explained. "First, the chosen one must sacrifice something precious to them, something that represents their connection to the material world. Then they must hold each artifact while speaking words of pure intention, asking not for personal gain, but for the healing of others. Finally, they must be willing to give up something even more valuable, their own comfort and safety, to complete the ceremony." Standing Bear watched Tommy's reaction carefully. Many adults had fled when they heard about the sacrifices required. The ritual demanded not just material possessions, but genuine willingness to put others' needs above one's own welfare. It was a test that few could pass, even among the most honored members of their tribe. Tommy set down his oversized sneakers and held up the turquoise bracelet, examining it in the fading light. "This belonged to my mother before she died," he said quietly. "It's the only thing I have left of her besides my memories. My grandmother wanted me to trade it for food today because we haven't eaten in 2 days." The warriors felt their hearts tighten at the boy's words. Here was a child who was literally starving, holding his most precious possession, and yet he was considering giving it up not for food, but to help people he didn't even know. "Tommy," Standing Bear said gently, "you don't understand what you would be risking. This ceremony, if it works, would require you to stay here alone for 3 days and nights while the power of the artifacts spreads across the land. You would have no food, no shelter, no protection except what the spirits provide. Many grown men would not survive such an ordeal," Thunderhorse added. "And if the ceremony fails, if you are not the one the prophecy speaks of, the artifacts could be destroyed forever. Our people would lose their last hope for survival. The responsibility would rest on your shoulders for the rest of your life." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything they had told him. The weight of the decision pressed down on his young shoulders like a heavy blanket. He thought about his grandmother, sick and waiting for him to return with food. He thought about his friends at school who had been coughing and looking pale. He thought about all the families on the reservation who were struggling just like he was. Then he looked up at the 2 warriors, these giants who had traveled so far and searched so hard for someone to help their people. They had put their faith in an ancient prophecy and a 5-year-old boy they had just met. The trust in their eyes was humbling and terrifying at the same time. "What happens if I don't try?" Tommy asked. "What happens to everyone if these artifacts never get activated?" Standing Bear's voice was heavy with sorrow. "Our people will continue to sicken and die. The children will suffer most of all. Within a few years, our reservation will be uninhabitable, and our tribe will be scattered to the winds like dust." Tommy nodded slowly, his young mind made up. "Then I have to try," he said simply, "even if I'm scared, even if I might fail. I can't let everyone suffer when there might be something I can do to help." The 2 warriors stared at this remarkable child, amazed by his courage and wisdom. In all their years of battle and spiritual seeking, they had rarely encountered someone so young who possessed such clear understanding of duty and sacrifice. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the desert in deep purples and blues, Tommy Running Bear prepared to take on a responsibility that would test every fiber of his being. The first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky as Standing Bear and Thunderhorse prepared the ceremonial space. They worked with practiced efficiency, their movements precise and reverent despite the urgency of their situation. Using sacred sage and sweetgrass, they created a circle of purification around the base of Eagle Rock, the ancient stone formation that had witnessed countless ceremonies over the centuries. Tommy watched in fascination as Thunderhorse arranged the 3 artifacts in a triangular pattern at the center of the circle. The crystal arrowhead caught the starlight and seemed to pulse with an inner glow. The bone whistle, carved with symbols that predated written history, hummed softly in the desert wind. The sacred red clay emanated a warmth that Tommy could feel, even from several feet away. "The ceremony must begin at midnight," Standing Bear explained as he sprinkled tobacco offerings in the 4 cardinal directions. "That is when the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds is thinnest. The ancestors will be listening most closely then. Tommy clutched his mother's turquoise bracelet tighter, feeling its smooth surface grow warm against his palm. He had been trying not to think about what he was about to give up, but as the moment approached, the weight of the sacrifice pressed heavily on his young heart. This bracelet was his only connection to the mother he barely remembered, the only proof that she had once loved him. Thunderhorse noticed the boy's struggle and knelt down beside him. "Tommy," he said gently, "sacrifice is never easy, even for the bravest warriors. But remember, you are not just giving up your bracelet. You are transforming it into something that will help heal our people. Your mother's love will live on in a different way." As the warriors continued their preparations, Tommy found himself remembering fragments of stories his grandmother had told him about their family's spiritual gifts. The Running Bear lineage had always produced individuals who could communicate with the spirit world, who could see beyond the ordinary boundaries of reality. Perhaps that was why he felt so drawn to help, why the artifacts seemed to call to him with invisible voices. Standing Bear began chanting in the old language, his deep voice carrying across the desert like distant thunder. The words were ancient, passed down through generations of medicine men and spiritual leaders. They spoke of healing, of unity between all living things, of the responsibility that came with spiritual power. As the chanting continued, strange things began to happen around them. The desert animals, normally hidden during the evening hours, began to emerge from their hiding places. Coyotes sat at the edge of the ceremonial circle, their golden eyes reflecting the starlight. An owl landed on a nearby cactus, its head turning, to observe the proceedings with ancient wisdom. Even the insects seemed to quiet their usual nighttime chorus, as if sensing the importance of what was taking place. Tommy felt a tingling sensation spreading through his body, starting in his feet, and moving upward like warm water. The air around them seemed to thicken, becoming charged with an energy that made his skin feel alive and sensitive. The stars above grew brighter, forming patterns that seemed meaningful, even though he couldn't interpret their messages. At 11:30, Standing Bear called Tommy to the center of the circle. The boy's bare feet stepped carefully over the lines of sage and tobacco, feeling the sacred ground pulse beneath him like a giant heartbeat. The three artifacts lay before him, waiting for his touch to awaken powers that had slept for generations. "Tommy, Running Bear," Thunderhorse intoned formally, "do you come to this ceremony of your own free will, knowing the risks and responsibilities you are accepting?" "I do," Tommy replied, his young voice steady despite his inner trembling. "Do you offer your sacrifice not for personal gain, but for the healing and protection of all people?" Standing Bear continued the ritual questioning. "I do," Tommy said, again holding up his mother's bracelet. In the starlight, the turquoise stone seemed to glow with the same blue-green color as deep water. As midnight approached, the energy in the circle intensified. Tommy could hear whispers in languages he didn't recognize, feel invisible presences gathering around them. The ancestors were arriving to witness this moment, to judge whether this young boy was truly the one their prophecy had foretold. At exactly 12 o'clock, Standing Bear nodded to Tommy. "It is time, little brother. Place your mother's bracelet in the center of the triangle, then pick up each artifact in turn. Speak from your heart. Ask for what our people need most." Tommy's hands shook as he placed the turquoise bracelet between the three ancient objects. The moment it touched the ground, all four items began to glow with soft, colored light. The bracelet pulsed blue, the arrowhead blazed white, the whistle gleamed silver, and the clay glowed deep red like coals from a sacred fire. He picked up the crystal arrowhead first, feeling its power surge through his small hands like electricity. The moment his skin touched the artifact, images flooded his mind. Visions of clean, flowing water, of children playing by streams that ran clear and pure, of crops growing green and strong in healthy soil. "Great spirits," Tommy whispered, his words carrying further than should have been possible in the still night air. "Please cleanse the water that gives life to our people. Take away the poison that makes the children sick. Let the streams run pure again." The arrowhead grew so bright that Standing Bear and Thunderhorse had to shield their eyes. Then suddenly, a sound like rushing water echoed across the desert, though no river ran anywhere nearby. In the distance, they could see lights appearing. Not electric lights, but something far more mystical, tracing the paths of underground streams and aquifers for miles in every direction. Tommy set down the arrowhead and picked up the bone whistle, immediately feeling a different kind of power, wild, untamed, connected to wind and storm and the vast sky above. More images filled his mind. Rain clouds gathering, lightning dancing between the stars, the sweet smell of water on dry earth. Spirits of sky and storm, he called out, lifting the whistle toward the heavens. Bring healing rain to wash the sickness from our land. Let thunder wake the sleeping earth. Let lightning purify what has been corrupted. The whistle sang without Tommy blowing into it, producing a sound like wind through canyon walls. Above them, clouds began forming out of the clear night sky, swirling and growing with impossible speed. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first fat raindrops began to fall, each one striking the ground with a sound like a drum beat. Finally, Tommy reached for the sacred clay, the most powerful and dangerous of the three artifacts. The moment his fingers touched it, he felt connected to the very bones of the earth, to the deep places where life itself was born. The power was overwhelming, threatening to sweep his young consciousness away like a leaf in a flood. But Tommy held on, drawing strength from thoughts of his grandmother, his friends, all the people who needed his help. Earth spirits, he cried out as the clay grew hot in his hands. Heal the soil that feeds our people. Make the ground fertile again. Let life return to places where death has taken hold. The moment Tommy spoke his final words to the earth spirits, the sacred clay exploded with heat and light in his small hands. The ground beneath the ceremonial circle began to tremble, not with the violence of an earthquake, but with the gentle rhythm of awakening life. Cracks appeared in the hard-packed desert floor, and from these fissures green shoots began to emerge, not the sparse, struggling plants typical of the harsh environment, but lush, healthy growth that seemed to pulse with vitality. Standing, Bear and Thunder Horse watched in amazement as the power of the three artifacts spread outward from their position, like ripples in a pond. The lights they had seen earlier, tracing the underground water sources, grew brighter and began to connect with each other, forming a vast network of purification that stretched across the entire reservation and beyond. Tommy stood in the center of it all, his small body serving as a conduit for forces older than civilization itself. The artifacts had accepted him completely, recognizing in his pure heart the innocence and selflessness the ancient prophecy had required. But the power flowing through him was almost more than his young frame could handle. His grandmother's turquoise bracelet, now glowing brighter than all three artifacts combined, began to rise from the ground where he had placed it. It floated in the air above the ceremonial triangle, spinning slowly as it transformed into something beyond its original form. The simple piece of jewelry was becoming a focus point, a permanent anchor that would keep the healing power active. Long after the ceremony ended, Thunderhorse suddenly grabbed Standing Bear's arm, pointing toward the horizon. "Look, brother, the signs are everywhere." In the distance, they could see the effects of Tommy's ritual spreading across the land like a wave of renewal. Dead trees were sprouting new leaves, their branches reaching toward the star-filled sky with renewed vigor. Dried creek beds began to fill with crystal-clear water that reflected the moon like liquid silver. The very air seemed cleaner, carrying scents of rain and growing things instead of the dusty, metallic taste that had hung over their homeland for months. But the most miraculous sight was the reservation itself. From their vantage point near Eagle Rock, they could see the entire valley below, and it was transforming before their eyes. Lights were coming on in houses as families woke to the sound of rushing water and the impossible green glow emanating from their newly fertile fields. Children were running outside in their nightclothes, laughing and pointing at the streams of pure water now flowing past their homes. Tommy swayed on his feet, the enormous power channeling through his small body beginning to take its toll. His face was pale, and his breathing had become shallow and rapid. The artifacts were drawing on his life force to fuel their magic, and there was a very real danger that he might not survive the completion of the ceremony. Standing Bear moved to catch the boy if he fell, but Thunderhorse held him back. "We cannot interfere now," he said urgently. "The ritual must be completed by Tommy alone, or all of this will be undone." The prophecy was clear about that. Tommy felt himself growing weaker with each passing moment, but he also felt something else. The presence of his ancestors gathering around him like warm, protective arms. His mother's spirit was there, her love flowing through the transformed bracelet that continued to spin above them. His great-grandfather Running Bear stood beside him, lending his strength. Generations of his family's spiritual warriors surrounded the ceremonial circle, offering their power to help him complete his sacred task. "I can feel them," Tommy whispered, his young voice filled with wonder despite his exhaustion. "They're all here, helping me." The three artifacts began to pulse in unison now, their combined light creating a beacon that could be seen for miles, in every direction. Native families throughout the region were waking up to witness what many would later describe as the most beautiful sight of their lives. A pillar of colored light stretching from the earth to the stars, carrying with it the promise of healing and renewal. But the ceremony was not yet complete. According to the ancient traditions Standing Bear and Thunderhorse had memorized, Tommy needed to make one final declaration, a statement of intent that would seal the magic permanently into the land and water of their homeland. Summoning the Ietadori, last of his strength, Tommy raised his arms toward the sky, still holding the sacred clay in his trembling hands. His voice, though weak from exhaustion, carried clearly across the desert as he spoke the words that came to him from somewhere deep within his young soul. "I give my strength so that others may be strong," he called out to the night. "I comfort so that others may find peace. I give my safety so that others may be protected. Let this healing power flow through our land for 7 generations. Let our children grow healthy and our elders find rest. Let our people remember that sometimes the smallest among us carry the greatest gifts." The moment he finished speaking, all 4 objects, the arrowhead, the whistle, the clay, and his transformed bracelet, blazed with such brilliant light that day seemed to break over the desert. Then just as suddenly, the light condensed and shot skyward like a comet traveling in reverse, carrying the healing magic up into the atmosphere where it would spread across the clouds and return to Earth as purifying rain. Tommy collapsed to his knees as the artifacts went dark, their power now permanently woven into the fabric of the land around them. The ceremonial circle fell silent except for the sound of his labored breathing and the gentle whisper of wind through the sagebrush. Standing Bear and Thunderhorse rushed to his side, catching him as he slumped forward. The boy's small body was burning with fever, and his pulse was rapid and weak. They had witnessed the successful completion of the most powerful healing ceremony in their tribe's history, but their young champion had paid a terrible price for his sacrifice. "Tommy," Standing Bear said urgently, cradling the boy's head in his large hands. "Tommy, stay with us. The ceremony is finished. You did it, little brother. You saved our people." Thunderhorse was already gathering his medicine supplies, preparing treatments that might help stabilize Tommy's condition. But even as he worked, they could both see that conventional remedies might not be enough. The boy had given everything he had to activate the ancient magic, and now his life hung in the balance. As if in response to their fear, the transformed turquoise bracelet drifted down from where it had been hovering and settled gently on Tommy's chest. The moment it touched him, some of his color returned and his breathing became slightly less labored. "The bracelet," Thunderhorse whispered in amazement. "His mother's love is protecting him just as his love protected all of us." In the distance, they could hear sounds of celebration as their people discovered the miraculous changes that had overtaken their homeland. Clean water flowed again. The poisoned soil had been purified and the very air felt fresh and healthy. But here at the center of it all, 2 giant warriors kept vigil over the small boy who had made it all possible, praying to every spirit they knew that his sacrifice would not cost him his life. 3 days passed in a blur of worry and wonder. Tommy lay unconscious beside Eagle Rock, his small body fighting to recover from the enormous spiritual and physical strain of channeling ancient magic. Standing Bear and Thunderhorse took turns watching over him, using every healing technique their grandmothers had taught them. They sang sacred songs, burned healing herbs, and applied traditional medicines made from desert plants. But it was Tommy's transformed bracelet that seemed to be doing the most good. The turquoise stone, now permanently changed by the ceremony, pulsed with gentle light whenever the boy's condition grew critical. Each time his breathing became too shallow or his fever spiked too high, the bracelet would grow warm and bright, stabilizing his vital signs through what could only be described as his mother's enduring love. On the morning of the fourth day, as the desert sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Tommy's eyes finally fluttered open. The first thing he saw was Standing Bear's concerned face hovering above him, the big warrior's eyes red with exhaustion from staying awake to monitor his condition. "Water," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible after days of silence. "Thunder." Horse immediately brought him a cup of the crystal-clear water that now flowed freely from a spring that had appeared near Eagle Rock during the ceremony. Tommy drank gratefully, amazed at how pure and refreshing it tasted compared to the brackish, chemically tainted water he had known all his life. "How long was I asleep?" he asked, struggling to sit up despite his weakness. 3 days and 3 nights, Standing Bear replied, helping to support the boy's back. "We were beginning to fear that you might not wake up. The ceremony took more out of you than we expected." Tommy looked around at their campsite and noticed something that made his young heart skip with joy. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of new life. Grass grew thick and green around Eagle Rock where before there had been only sand and sparse weeds. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, their petals glowing softly in the morning light. The harsh desert had been transformed into something approaching paradise. "Did it work?" he asked eagerly. "Are our people healed?" Thunder Horse smiled, the first genuine happiness either warrior had shown since beginning their quest. "C4, yourself, little brother." He helped Tommy to his feet and guided him to a high point on Eagle Rock where they could look out over the entire valley. What Tommy saw took his breath away. The reservation that had been dying just days before was now vibrant with life and activity. Clean rivers flowed where there had been nothing but dry beds. Fields that had been barren now showed rows of healthy crops growing with supernatural speed. Children played in crystal-clear streams while their parents worked in gardens that produced vegetables larger and more nutritious than any they had ever seen. But the most wonderful sight was the people themselves. Even from a distance, Tommy could see that the sickness that had plagued his community was gone. Children ran and played with energy they hadn't shown in months. Elders sat in the shade of newly sprouted trees, their faces bright with hope instead of the despair that had marked them for so long. "The mining company upstream has been forced to shut down," Standing Bear explained. "When our lawyers tested the water quality after your ceremony, they found that it was now purer than it had been before the mining began. The company couldn't explain how their pollutants had been completely neutralized, but the environmental authorities had no choice but to close their operation." Thunder Horse pointed to a distant hill where construction equipment sat abandoned. "They tried to restart their operation twice, but every time they attempted to resume mining, their machinery would break down for no reason anyone could understand. The spirits are protecting our land now in ways we never imagined possible." Tommy felt a warm glow of satisfaction deep in his chest. His sacrifice had not been in vain. His people were safe, healthy, and prosperous in ways they hadn't been for generations. But as he looked down at the transformed bracelet on his wrist, now permanently fused to his skin like a living tattoo, he realized that his role in this story was far from over. "Tommy," Standing Bear said seriously, "there's something else you need to know. The tribal council has been meeting since the night of your ceremony. They want to declare you a sacred guardian, a permanent protector of our people's spiritual welfare." "What does that mean?" Tommy asked, though part of him already sensed the answer. Thunder Horse knelt down to meet Tommy at eye level. "It means that you would be trained in the old ways, taught all the ceremonies and healing rituals that have been passed down through our ancestors. You would become a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds, helping to guide our people through whatever challenges the future might bring." The prospect was both exciting and terrifying for a 5-year-old boy. Tommy had always felt different from other children his age, more sensitive to the unseen forces that moved through the world around him. The ceremony had awakened abilities within him that he was only beginning to understand, and he could feel them growing stronger each day. "But what about my grandmother?" he asked with concern. "I can't leave her alone. She's been taking care of me since my parents died." Standing Bear smiled warmly. "Your grandmother has already been informed of everything that happened. She's been moved to a new house near the tribal center, where she'll be cared for by the best healers we have. She's actually feeling better than she has in years, thanks to the purified air and water that now surrounds our reservation. And," Thunderhorse added with a grin, "she says she's very proud of her grandson for having the courage to help his people when they needed him most. She always knew you were special, Tommy. Now the whole tribe knows it too." As they climbed down from Eagle Rock, Tommy noticed that the 3 ancient artifacts were still lying where they had been placed during the ceremony. But they looked different now, older somehow, as if they had aged centuries in just a few days. The crystal arrowhead was now cloudy and cracked. The bone whistle had turned a deep brown color and felt brittle to the touch. The sacred clay had hardened into an unbreakable stone. "They gave everything they had to fuel the ceremony," Standing Bear explained when he saw Tommy examining them. "Like you, they sacrificed themselves for the good of our people. They can never be used again, but they've served their purpose." Tommy carefully wrapped the spent artifacts in a piece of soft leather. Even though they were no longer magical, they deserved to be treated with respect for the role they had played in saving his people. As they prepared to leave Eagle Rock and return to the reservation, Tommy felt a deep sense of completion mixed with anticipation for what lay ahead. The frightened, hungry little boy who had stumbled upon 2 crying warriors just days before was gone forever. In his place stood someone who had touched the very foundations of existence and emerged transformed. The walk back to the tribal center took most of the day as Tommy was still weak from his ordeal. But with each step, he felt strength returning to his small body. The transformed bracelet on his wrist pulsed gently, reminding him that his mother's love would always be with him, no matter what challenges he might face in the future. Word of their return had spread quickly through the reservation. By the time they reached the main settlement, hundreds of people had gathered to welcome them home. Children who had been pale and sickly just days before now ran alongside them with rosy cheeks and bright eyes. Adults who had been bent with worry and illness stood tall and proud, their faces glowing with health and hope. Tommy's grandmother was waiting for him at the front of the crowd, tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. Despite her age and recent illness, she looked stronger and more vibrant than Tommy had seen her in years. The moment she saw him, she broke through the crowd and gathered him into her arms, holding him tight as if she would never let him go. "Again, my brave grandson," she whispered in his ear, her voice thick with emotion. "I always knew the spirits had special plans for you, but I never imagined anything like this." The tribal chief, a dignified elder named Joseph White Eagle, stepped forward to address the crowd. His voice carried clearly across the gathered families as he spoke of Tommy's sacrifice and the miracle that had saved their people. "This child has given us back our future," Chief White Eagle declared. "Our water runs pure, our soil is fertile, and our children are healthy because one small boy had the courage to risk everything for others. We will remember this day for 7 generations, just as he asked the spirits to remember us." As the celebration continued into the evening, Tommy found himself surrounded by people wanting to thank him, to touch him, to hear the story of what had happened at Eagle Rock. But despite all the attention and praise, he remained humble and thoughtful, understanding instinctively that the power he had channeled was not his own, but belonged to all his people. Standing Bear and Thunderhorse stayed close to him throughout the festivities, serving as both protectors and guides as he navigated his new role in the community. They had completed their sacred mission, but they had also gained something unexpected, a spiritual brother whose courage and purity had reminded them why they had become warriors in the first place. Standing Bear and Thunderhorse stayed close to him throughout the festivities, serving as both protectors and guides as he navigated his new role in the community. They had completed their sacred mission, but they had also gained something unexpected, a spiritual brother whose courage and purity had reminded them why they had become warriors in the first place. As the stars appeared in the clear night sky, Tommy sat with his grandmother on the porch of their new home, watching the celebration continue in the distance. The sound of laughter and singing filled the air, a joyful noise that hadn't been heard on the reservation for far too long. "Grandmother," Tommy said quietly, "do you think I did the right thing?" She took his small hand in her gnarled fingers, feeling the warmth that still emanated from his transformed bracelet. "My child," she replied with infinite love and wisdom, "you did what your heart told you was right. That is all any of us can ever do. The spirits chose well when they guided those warriors to you." Tommy nodded, satisfied with her answer. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and challenges as he began his training as a spiritual guardian. But tonight, he was content to sit with his grandmother and listen to the sounds of his people celebrating life, health, and hope restored. 5 years had passed since that miraculous night at Eagle Rock, and Tommy Running Bear had grown into a remarkable young man. Now 10 years old, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the ultimate test and emerged victorious. The transformed turquoise bracelet still adorned his wrist, now seamlessly integrated into his skin like a living tattoo that pulsed with gentle light whenever he used his spiritual abilities. Under the guidance of Standing Bear and Thunder Horse, who had remained on the reservation to serve as his mentors, Tommy had mastered healing arts that typically took decades to learn. He could purify water with a touch, encourage crops to grow with whispered words, and sense illness in people and animals long before symptoms appeared. But more importantly, he had learned to use these gifts wisely, understanding that great power must always be tempered with great responsibility. The reservation had continued to flourish beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What had once been a struggling community on the verge of extinction had become a model of sustainable living that attracted visitors from around the world. Scientists came to study the impossibly pure water and fertile soil. Environmentalists marveled at the perfect balance between human habitation and natural wildlife. Spiritual seekers from many traditions journeyed there, hoping to learn from the boy who had channeled ancient magic to heal the land. But Tommy remained humble despite the attention and acclaim. He attended the reservation school like any other child, helped his grandmother with household chores, and played with friends in the crystal-clear streams that now meandered through their homeland. The only difference was that twice a week, he would disappear into the desert with Standing Bear and Thunder Horse for intensive training in the old ways. On this particular morning, Tommy was sitting by the sacred spring near Eagle Rock, practicing a meditation technique that helped him communicate with the water spirits. The spring had become a pilgrimage site for his people, a place where families brought sick relatives to drink from waters blessed by ancient magic. Tommy came here often, not just to practice his abilities, but to remember the night that had changed everything. He was deep in meditation when he sensed someone approaching. Opening his eyes, he saw a familiar figure walking toward him across the desert. Chief White Eagle, now in his 80s but still moving with the dignity of a natural leader. "Good morning, grandfather," Tommy said respectfully, using the traditional term of address for tribal elders. "Good morning, young guardian," the chief replied, settling himself on a flat rock beside the spring. "I have news that I think you should hear." Tommy turned to face him, instantly alert. Chief White Eagle's expression was serious, but not worried, suggesting that whatever news he carried was significant rather than troubling. "The Federal Environmental Protection Agency has been studying our reservation for the past year," the chief began. "They've been trying to understand how our water and soil became so pure, how our ecosystem recovered so completely from the damage caused by the mining operation." Tommy nodded. He had been aware of the government scientists who periodically visited to take samples and conduct tests. Their instruments could measure the remarkable quality of the reservation's natural resources, but they had no scientific explanation for how such dramatic improvement had occurred so quickly. "Yesterday, they released their final report," Chief White Eagle continued. "They've declared our reservation a natural wonder of North America, protected forever from any form of industrial development. No mining company, no factory, no highway construction will ever be allowed to threaten our land again." Tommy felt a warm glow of satisfaction. The protection his ceremony had granted was now backed by federal law, ensuring that future generations would inherit the paradise he had helped create. But that's not the most important news, the chief added with a slight smile. The report has attracted international attention. Representatives from indigenous communities around the world are coming here to learn about our conservation methods. They want to understand how a small reservation achieved what billion-dollar environmental programs have failed to accomplish. What will you tell them? Tommy asked, curious about how his people would explain their miraculous transformation to outsiders. Chief White Eagle's eyes twinkled with wisdom. We will tell them the truth, as much of it as they are ready to hear. We will speak of community cooperation, traditional ecological knowledge, and the power of spiritual connection to the land. Some will understand the deeper meaning behind our words. Others will take away lessons that can still help their own people, even if they don't grasp the full truth. Tommy understood. The world was not ready to hear about ancient artifacts and spiritual ceremonies that could literally transform reality. But the principles behind his sacrifice, putting community needs above personal comfort, working in harmony with natural forces, believing in the possibility of positive change, these were lessons that could benefit anyone. Tommy, the chief, said, his voice becoming more serious. I need to ask you something important. As word spreads about our success here, there will be more and more requests for you to travel to other communities, to share your knowledge, and perhaps to attempt similar healings. The question is whether you feel ready for such responsibility. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of what Chief White Eagle was suggesting. He thought about other communities struggling with environmental destruction, other children going hungry while their land died around them. He felt the weight of his abilities and the calling to use them for the greatest good. I want to help wherever I can, Tommy said finally. But I also know that what happened here was unique. The artifacts, the prophecy, the specific circumstances, they all came together in a way that might never happen again. Wise words, the chief agreed. But remember, you yourself are changed by what happened that night. The power that flowed through you left permanent gifts. Even without ancient artifacts, you possess abilities that could bring healing to many places. Standing Bear and Thunder Horse appeared over the horizon, returning from their daily patrol of the reservation's borders. They had taken on the role of guardians, ensuring that the peace and prosperity of their homeland remained undisturbed. When they saw Tommy and the chief deep in conversation, they approached with respectful curiosity. We were just discussing Tommy's future, Chief White Eagle explained as the two warriors joined their circle. The outside world is beginning to take notice of our young guardian. Thunder Horse nodded thoughtfully. We have sensed this day coming for some time. Tommy's training is nearly complete. Soon he will need to decide whether his path leads him beyond our borders or keeps him here as protector of our people. Why? Can't I do both? Tommy asked with the directness of youth. I could help other communities when they truly need it, but always return here to my family and responsibilities. Standing Bear smiled at the boy's wisdom. That is exactly what we hoped you would say. A true spiritual guardian serves not just one tribe but all of humanity when called upon. As the four of them sat beside the sacred spring, watching the crystal-clear water flow toward the reservation where it would nourish crops and refresh families, Tommy felt a deep sense of purpose settling over him like a comfortable blanket. His childhood had ended the night he chose to sacrifice his mother's bracelet for the good of his people, but in return, he had gained something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that one person, no matter how small or poor or seemingly powerless, could make a difference that echoed through generations. The sun climbed higher in the clear blue sky, illuminating a landscape that remained a testament to the power of courage, sacrifice, and love. And in that sacred place where ancient magic had been awakened by a child's pure heart, Tommy Running Bear prepared for whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that his people would always have a guardian watching over them. The sun climbed higher in the clear blue sky, illuminating a landscape that remained a testament to the power of courage, sacrifice, and love. And in that sacred place where ancient magic had been awakened by a child's pure heart, Tommy Running Bear prepared for whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that his people would always have a guardian watching over them. The story of the two giant warriors who begged a poor 5-year-old boy for help would be told and retold for generations to come, inspiring other young people to believe that they too might possess the power to heal the world. And always, the moral would remain the same, that the greatest magic of all lies not in ancient artifacts or mystical ceremonies, but in the willingness to put others' needs before our own, and to never underestimate the difference one person can make when their heart is pure and their courage is true.